Everyone, and welcome to the panel Why I Quit My Job, put together by the New System Alliance and hosted by me, Rudy Harries. I'd like to ask the people watching, if they feel comfortable, that they introduce themselves in the chat and tell us about how they're feeling and what they're hoping to talk about today in this panel. And then if you have a question for us, if you could please put in the Q&A instead of the chat, that'd be brilliant. So rather than introducing everyone by their professional roles and their the organizations they work with, I think today it'd be more appropriate if we just ask the panel to introduce themselves as people and for them to talk about, why exactly it is that they quit their job. So should we start with Sarah? You're on mute, Sarah.
That's a really good start, isn't it? Well, shall I just turn that around and say I feel mute a lot of the time, even when I'm talking? Did you like the way I did that? Yeah, it's very strange to be asked to introduce yourself when it's not to do with work. All right, I'm going to be really honest, straight up front. I am spending most of my time out of my comfort zone at the moment. That's how I'm going to introduce myself. I have started a new job, and I've at one CIC, and it's a startup organisation, and it's to try and create supported housing around the UK, homeless people. And I thought that if I started a new job and it was a startup, that it would be easier. Actually, it's a huge amount of pressure, and that's basically why I'm massively out of my comfort zone, because the pressure is on to get it right. But already I'm a little bit of a weirdo in the organisation because I'm saying different things. Already we're trying to create operations based on a system that is already there. And I've gone on a journey where I started off as a minion in an organisation, and I had lots of ideas there, which I had to be manipulative to get the ideas to come to fruition. And then everybody said it was their ideas. And so I worked my way up, and I eventually became CEO of an organisation. And I thought, great, I've got the power to change things now. I changed absolutely everything I could in that organisation, and we were still letting homeless people down. Now I've started a new organisation. It's brand new, it's the pressure's on, and already I'm thinking, shit, quite frankly, that's enough for me. Over to someone else.
Should we hear from Zoe Thomas next?
I was on mute as well. My name's Zoe. I left the prison service as an SO a couple of months ago when the reality hit over, COVID especially, but it'd been building before that I could make more of a difference on the outside, and actually what I'd set out to do wasn't possible while wearing a uniform. So that's me, really.
Cool. And Zoe Webb?
Hi everyone. As Rudy said, I'm Zoe. I'm here today really because I believe in people, and I think that the current system is broken. I think that we focus on labels and we focus on problems, and the result of that ends up that we focus on trying to fix people. It became quite uncomfortable for me working within an organisation where the power balance was so out of sync, and I felt like it just continued to dehumanise people. and that's why I'm here, just to talk about, I recognise that the people that are working within the system are really trying the best. They really are. This is not a personal vendetta against any individuals or organisations. I think it's important to get that out there. But it is exhausting. It's frustrating. It limits what, you're completely limited in what you can offer people. And yeah, just completely disempowering.
Yeah, agreed there. And Pete.
Just on mute as well. Hi, I'm Pete from Belfast. I'm a long-term youth worker, then community development worker, and unfortunately, fortunately, I'm old enough to remember a time when community development was the norm. It was the accepted norm, and we'd focus on what's strong in people, what's strong in communities, try and build on that and try and amplify it. But things are maybe different now, and that's why I'm here. And I've come to sort of notice that the sort of focus on deficits and fixing people is maybe distracting us away from sort of bigger issues such as poverty. And that's what I'm sort of keen to talk about and share ideas with and listen to other people's ideas. And just to finish off, I'm going to sort of pose a question that nobody has to answer now. Just have a think about it. It's a question I've asked myself 1,000 times, and it is, does anyone feel that they're being kept in a box? And if so, why might that be? Thank you.
That's a really interesting question. I think I could. I'll have a go at answering it, and then we may see what the panelists have to say, whether they need time to think about it. I think for me, I'm Rudy. I have recently also started working for a startup like Sarah, and we'll talk about that a bit more in a minute. But yeah, it seems like even when you start to put something together to break a box, in order to function and be sort of accepted as a professional organization, you have to sit in the box in order to be sort of, in order to become part of the ecosystem, as it were. And it's very difficult to get out of it. So I definitely think that's something to think about. Sarah, do you want to talk a bit about, what you expected out of the new organization and what the sort of reality has been a bit more, maybe?
Yeah, well, I mean, it's really early days, and I think, well, actually, it was a really interesting question that Pete said, because I wrote an email the other day, and it had in it a very reasonable idea from me around putting people at the centre of whatever we do. And then I'd put another clause saying, if you think this is, not right, then I'll get back in my box. That's what I put. Yeah. Very, very unassertive email. But the trouble is that it's not just organisations, it's people as well. So, when you start a new job, you're quite vulnerable. Yeah. And I guess, wherever you've got organisations, you've got people, and wherever you've got people, you've got egos as well. So you're not only dealing with trying to fit into the system, you're dealing with people's egos trying to fit in with an organisation. And, if you're not feeling confident, then you're not going to challenge things. And that's where I was in that particular email. I've kind of got my mojo back since then. But if we feel like that, how do people going through services feel? So I think that, people like boxes. It's ordered, it's structured, it's, give people a label on a box and everyone knows where they are, and, that money goes for that box and that person, that labeled box. But people aren't like that. Problems aren't like that. People aren't like that. And so there's not enough flexibility and challenging and fluidity around providing housing and support. Mm-hmm. And, if I feel like I'm in a box, then how does anybody ever change anything? That's my question to somebody.
Yeah. Yeah, for me, I was a service user of homelessness services, and because I was a trans man who had escaped abuse, they didn't have a box for me. So I know what it's like, you know, and so many people fall through the cracks in the system, and it's it's just impossible. They don't know what to do. And then it's up to, what I have found is that it's individuals working in the system who are confident enough and secure enough in their jobs to break the rules a little bit. And then if it turns out well, they don't get in trouble. Whereas if it turned out badly, they would have gone in trouble. So I don't know if there's something that people might want to say about how maybe when you've had these jobs, you've had to quit. Was there times where you've had to bend the rules, and sometimes it's been okay if it works out well, and sometimes it hasn't been okay if it doesn't? Or what has your experience been like? Have you tried to bend the rules, or have you tried to not bend the rules, or how has that sort of been for you? And I'll ask, let's go with Zoe T.
Gosh, I keep muting it. I don't think so much. When you were talking about the box feet, I was thinking about the generation game. And in a prison where I was, like, the women came in and we had to rapidly fit them into a box so then they could start a treatment program. And it was literally like looking at the woman, seeing her main issue as such, and then just putting her in that box and forgetting everything else. So that was quite picturesque memory. But I suppose it's not so much of the breaking or the bending the rules. I don't think that's something that comes about from the people in service that are genuinely wanting to be there. But I think that they can break out of the box of the stereotype. So being kind and compassionate and caring, giving someone a bit longer of your time if they're in need to. And I think that all that goes unnoticed by lots of people. But then I've had situations where frontline wing staff have come to me and said that they have received emails from governors sort of nitpicking about information that hasn't been filled in, or a date on a form, or a time on a form, which I understand is equally important, but that gets picked up, but none of the good work that they've done has been acknowledged at all. Actually, the reducing the risk and the kindness that they've delivered. So I suppose for me.
What do you think, Pete, about this bending and breaking rules? How it's worked for you, or hasn't?
Yeah, I'm not even sure if it's a sort of question of rules, but more about your sort of own attitude, or maybe your own values being in conflict with the system you're working within, you know. And sort of rules implies maybe you're sort of breaking policies, but that's not the case usually. So say, for example, the system we're working in, most of us, it'll focus largely on people's deficits. So what's wrong with people, what needs fixed in people. And all the outcomes that sort of we'll need to measure for funders will all be based on those sort of deficits and how we have sort of fixed or filled those deficits. But either consciously or unconsciously, whether we're working with young people or adults, I think we tend to work with people's strengths. You tend to sort of look at people and listen to them and say, oh God, that's a really interesting part of you, or that's a really interesting skill you have. That's a really interesting interest you have. And we sort of zone in on it and start sort of encouraging that. Obviously, it's a good place to start, and you're starting with what's strong in that person. But there's nowhere it can be measured, you know, in the systems that are in place. So maybe we don't get a lot of credit for a lot of the work that we do. And to me, it's actually the good part of the work that we do, and it's maybe not acknowledged, you know. I don't know how people feel about that.
Yeah. What do you think, Zoe Webb?
Yeah, I completely agree with what Pete's saying there. I think that we capture or try to capture data and measure outcomes. I'm not even sure what happens to those outcomes. And people that I've spoken to within the sector couldn't tell me when I asked them that question. And it is all focused, like I said at the beginning, the reason that I'm here and the reason that I've walked away from from roles is because it is all focused on what's wrong with a person, not what's strong with them.
Yeah. Do you think that a lot of these issues with, focus on deficits and what we can measure, as Pete said, comes from the way that funding works, or is it just the culture in general in this sector, do you think?
I think it's much bigger than that, actually. Without going down the political rabbit hole, we all know there isn't enough accommodation out there. There isn't enough homes for people, and because of that, a consequence is that we then have to resource and prioritise that finite resource that is available, and that then turns into deserving and undeserving. People have to jump through that many hoops to even be considered on allocation policies. They've got to prove the tenancy ready when they might have, had many tenancies. No one's actually getting to the root of why things have happened within a system and really getting to grips with, someone might have a difficulty in their life, but no one's looking at that. All they're looking at is the problem that's the worst experience that they might have had in their life that has then become their identity. Yeah,
definitely. Ooh, does anyone else have anything to say on that subject? On is it because of funding, or is it a wider culture, or is it something else? What do you think, Sarah?
Yeah, well, I think it's all of it, really. And I think it is to do with politics, and I think politics should be spoken about because it has a direct link to how that's expressed in terms of funding streams. But I mean, I think with KPIs, it's outcomes, it's the end of a very bad pathway. And in my role as CEO, the first KPIs did were rubbish because basically they're asking the wrong questions. So, like I said, I did every single thing in that organisation to make it a better place, and it was nurturing. And so, for instance, if you have mental health KPIs and, all the KPIs want to do is measure distance travelled, well, where I worked, people began addressing their mental health because they felt safe and they felt that they could, and that there were the services around to help them. So straight away, people that hadn't come in with a mental health said that they had one. And so, the first year that I was there, my KPIs were bombed. I got sent up to head teacher about it. Because they're asking the wrong questions, because it's a load of rubbish by the time you get to them. There's too many things have gone wrong before. So the next year I just lied like everybody else.
Yeah, I think that's come up quite a lot in conversations I've had with people. You do have to lie or phrase things very carefully in order to get ahead, get what you need in the system. Maybe I don't know, maybe we could hear from Pete or Zoe Thomas about that. Like, have you felt pressured to lie or say things slightly differently in order to make things work for your service users, I guess? So I think Pete might have something to, it looks like.
Again, I'm not even sure that it's always to do with people telling lies. I think a huge element is that people get sucked into the accepted norms around language and processes. And I think as I've got a bit older, I'm just maybe a bit more confident and a bit braver to stick to my own guns and not feel that I have to fit in anymore. And to pick up on something Sarah said earlier, she was saying when you're new into a job, you might feel like you're an island standing on your own and you're going to swim against the tide. Whereas I found that happens even earlier. And I noticed it first and this might be where you can sort of choose to tell lies or choose to be yourself. At interview stage, you go for an interview for a new job, and the organization you're going the interview with might sort of have bought into the sort of deficit system in a big way. Then you come along and try to answer the interview questions from a strengths-based approach. And you can tell that that panel are looking at you as if you're dysfunctional, and likewise you're answering their questions and you view them as dysfunctional. You know, so I think there at various different stages you're going to have sort of choices. Do I almost comply? Do I give in? Do I break to the will of the system? Or do I acknowledge what I've sort of seen and witnessed, what works, and try to sort of bring people into that way of thinking, you know? So I think that can happen at sort of various stages where you're, and I suppose it just comes down to conflicts, doesn't it? Whenever you're sort of personally in conflict with the system, do you have the confidence to resolve that? And I suppose the good news is, and I suppose I would want people to take away some hope from this today, is I'm very lucky that I found the employer that I'm with now. And I'm very lucky that I found the people that are here today. So, like, don't lose hope. There are a lot of good people and there are a lot of better ways out there. Unfortunately, we're all still working within the same system. But at least now we can, after today, after this week, we can maybe choose to work more collectively, you know, to bring about the changes that we want to see. And there's power in numbers, isn't there? Collective action. So everybody hang in there and hang together.
I think, Pete, I think you're spot on. And I think it goes back to values, really. It's like, you know, ask, why are we doing this work? You know, go back to the absolute basics. Why are we bothering to do this work? And, you know, from that comes your value base. And for me, it's, I don't have a choice anymore. You know, I might have a moment where I send an email where I say, you know, what about this? Or I'll get back in my box. And then I think, no, sod that, because I can't. You know, you have to, if your values are compromised, then you don't have a choice. It doesn't mean that you have to quit your job necessarily, but it means that you need to be fairly uncomfortable in your job and challenging all the time. And, you know, we're only human, so we can only take so much discomfort. So on occasions we try and make it easier for ourselves. But if you go back to your value base and you always put the person you're working for, the people you're serving, at the center of everything you do, then you can't really go wrong.
Definitely, yeah. One thing that I started out in this sector as a service user, going to conferences and talking about my experiences, and there's something, I don't know if anyone else will have opinions on this, but there's something quite strange about conferences to me, because a lot of what they say in a lot of these conferences is like, for example, when I was doing the conference circuit, there was a massive sort of vogue for PI, so what was it, psychologically informed environments. And it was all very much like, oh, you know, we have to center the person, we have to, you know, look at the person and not put them through these protocols. You know, we need to get rid of these like one size fits all protocols. And I was like very much like, yes, you know, finally this is thing. And I think there was something in the wisdom from the system which said that change is happening too slow. So what I want to ask is it moving in a more positive direction with things like PI and organizations looking to embed PI and all that kind of stuff? Or do you feel that the conversation is being had, but it's being had very aesthetically and not like authentically? So should I ask Zoe Thomas first, because you didn't get to answer the last question?
That's right. yeah, I think that the conversations are being had, trainings put in place. Myself, I delivered training within the prison setting, and staff were attending it. So it was mandatory training. So I was really lucky that my governor made it mandatory training. And it was being trauma-informed training, led by an amazing charity. And it was gifted to the prison service. So, you know, anything in the prison service that gifted should be taken as precious. So I'd spend the day delivering this training. Staff really embraced it, actually, when they were there. There was a lot of people that believed what was being said and agreed, and lots of conversation, but then that wasn't being put into practice, and it wasn't being put on their yearly appraisals or anything like that. So there's no accountability for it. So, but as a tick box on a KPI, the staff team had collectively completed their training. So I think, overall from the outside, it looks very shiny and new, but what's being practiced is quite different.
Yeah,
and I don't know how we can move that forward and change it. It feels quite overwhelming. I recently did a presentation to a conference on my experiences and how to embed PI in a practical way. It was tough. It was really tough to kind of think, because it doesn't tend to be very practical, you know, the stuff that is said in these conferences. But anyway, I'll come to Zoe Webb next. What do you think about this?
I think that the conversations are definitely happening. The training is definitely being delivered. I think that, you know, in a lot of ways, we're pushing on an open door. But in terms of authenticity, I personally haven't seen it. In the roles that I have worked in previously, I moved over into the provider sector for a short time because I was really interested in the Homes for Kathy movement, and felt like I'd become quite frustrated in the statutory sector. So I thought that, okay, maybe I'll try this for a little bit and see if this, you know, can make a difference this way. But if I'm being really honest, what I found was tokenistic. Whether it's because it's in its infancy, I don't know. I think in principle, it's a really good movement, and it's really refreshing to see so many providers signing up to want to, you know, address homelessness. But the system is so big and there isn't enough accommodation. Actually seeing, you know, it having any agency is yet to be seen, I think.
Robert White just put in the chat, without the PIS, psychologically informed system, you can't have PI, which I think is very true. What do you think, Sarah?
Well, I was going to say exactly that. I think, you know, my experience of PI, I've, you know, embedded it everywhere that I've gone. And, you know, the training was absolutely fantastic. But ironically, I think PI has evolved because the system's crap. You know, if you had PI in Parliament, if you had PI with commissioners, maybe you wouldn't have to have PI at the other end. So there's nothing wrong with PI, but it's a function of what's gone wrong down the line, you know, and then frontline staff have to mop everything up. You know, when you've got, you know, people who are struggling with the housing environment and the fact that they're not in the right service and they're not getting person-led approach, then, you know, suddenly everybody has to go on training to be PI because of what's been created further upstream. So don't blame the PI people.
Definitely. What do you think, Pete?
I'm just picking up on a comment here from Oliver Townsend, and he's saying that I'm just making sure my eyesight's very bad. I can't read right in this side, so I hope I got the name right. He's saying that trauma-informed approaches need to be used to change the system, not to tinker inside it. And that's a sort of really profound statement. And picking up on what Sarah's saying about thinking about what's further upstream. And I remember sort of starting to make observations, and it was only when I read, there was a great book by a guy called Neil Thompson, Anti-Discriminatory Practice, and within it, a lot of you will have heard of this, his PCS analysis model. So he's looking at sort of taking any sort of scenario or problem and looking at it like a personal level, a cultural level, and a structural level. And those sort of three levels constantly sort of interact with each other, you know. And what I've tend to observe, and you can start keeping an eye out for it yourselves, is when we're looking at sort of this deficits-based system, and we're talking about people's needs, or we're talking about bringing different models in to help us to deal with people's needs, like tinkering within the system, Oliver, they all tend to be on that personal level, you know. Sometimes it'll reach the sort of cultural level where we're sort of examining language and saying, oh, maybe we shouldn't be joking about race, and maybe we shouldn't be sort of belittling trans people. And, you know, it sometimes pops up to the cultural level, but very, very few times will you see us beginning to analyze things at the structural level. And to sort of answer the question from earlier, you know, where does that fit together? Is that a political sleight of hand? You know, or does, you know, funding criteria doesn't come from nowhere. It comes from social policy, or it comes from government priorities somewhere further up that chain. So then we have to ask the question, is it a sleight of hand? Do we all start squabbling about what's happening down on this personal level, and we're thus distracted from what's happening on the cultural level? And I think it was Zoe Webb had rightly mentioned, you know, we're trying to work in homelessness, but there ain't enough homes.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah.
So what do you do?
Yeah. I think for me, as someone who has been homeless and who now works in homelessness prevention, it's been so frustrating to see during the COVID crisis that when the political sphere wanted to and they needed to, they could just get people off the streets, you know? And now it's just all going back to the way it was before. So I don't know if the people who worked in homelessness specifically want to tell me how they kind of felt about that, because I know for me it was just it's something that we've talked about in conferences a lot, you know, is that giving people homes is economically, socially, morally the right thing to do, and yet these political choices are being made to keep people on the streets. So I know Zoe's nodding, so I'll come to you first. Zoe Webb, I should say.
Yeah, I mean, as Pete paid reference to, you know, that I really strongly believe that it is political. And, you know, I've forgotten your question, sorry, so I'm just going to talk about what I found with the everybody in. You know, local authorities report rough sleeper numbers on a regular basis. You know, they do an annual rough sleeper count, but since the rough sleeper initiative, that's increased, and they have to report the numbers into central government. And those numbers are not reflective at all in terms of what the actual problem is. So when coronavirus first hit, and the Everybody In campaign was sort of being rolled out, you know, it was reported all over the media, where have all these people come from? These numbers are just off the scale. Everyone's trying it on, you know. And I just thought, well, where did they, you know, what did they think? You know, these people have always been there. The fact that they weren't actually counted because they weren't visible, they still need somewhere to live. And it was just a real reflection of how out of sync the public is with the problem.
Yeah, there's genuine belief that I have experienced even in my own family, and I think it's absolutely bananas, that people think that people fake being homeless because they think that, have you come across this? They think that people sit on the street and pretend to be homeless because they make so much money living on the street, and it's just absolutely mad. But yeah, no, what was my question? I've forgotten. Oh, about the COVID. So the COVID response has obviously proven that the government can do things quite quickly when it wants to. So how has that sort of made you feel as someone who's worked in these systems and been told, oh, you know, we don't have the money, we don't have the resources? So that's kind of I think what I was getting at. So I don't know if you want to speak on that.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I do think it's a political decision, and I don't think that the allocation policies help. I think they're completely out of touch.
Yeah.
And you know, another example, they were temporarily suspended during the first lockdown, and people were direct letting into any available properties that providers had, which, you know, maybe that needs to be considered on a wider context. But it's very, very political.
Yeah, definitely. What do you think, Sarah, on this topic?
Yeah, I mean, I know you're not supposed to say this, but I don't really know. I think that it's possibly even more to do with power than it is to do with money, because I think that, you know, even for those people that don't really care about homelessness, it's very inconvenient, you know, having to see homeless people or, you know, step over them when you're going to the theatre. And so basically people don't want homelessness for whatever their agenda is. But I think, you know, it's to do with funding streams and how, you know, siloed funding and how, you know, it comes from the source, and, you know, where it ends up has absolutely bears no resemblance to what people need.
Yeah.
And, you know, people, again, in the front line, it's all skew with, you know, the money that they've been paid for is channeled into something that's wrong. It's not right for what's needed. So it is partly to do with money and political agendas, but it's also to do with the actual system that and the power base that the money runs through.
Yeah. I know, Zoe, you talked a bit about COVID being one of the catalysts for why you left your job. So what were your sort of feelings about what you saw, how the COVID response was, how that made you feel?
I think it was quite disheartening, actually, at times. I think that suddenly there was an excuse to isolate others that were already quite isolated, to be able to box them away and just forget them a bit further until they sort of caused problems, as it was seen in society's view. And then even now, still all this time down the line, that those problems haven't been managed from the top. They spend a lot of time, people higher up, talking through policies and discussing policies and having countless policy meetings. Ultimately, nothing has come of those. So the women I worked with are still those forgotten women. They're still those women that are being put in that box and isolated and humiliated and degraded, very much so at the start of COVID. It's been very upsetting to be a part of. It was too much.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. What are your thoughts, Pete?
I noticed a very interesting dynamic during COVID, and as people began to work from home and go on furlough from the voluntary sector, there was almost a sort of withdrawal by institutions and organisations from community space. And when that withdrawal happened, communities weren't abandoned. Communities rose up themselves and provided their own solutions. And I'm sort of wondering, is that a metaphor for what would happen in a new system? You know, I think it's a case of the emperor's new clothes, so to speak. We've sort of told people for so long that you need our help, you need to be reliant on our organizations. But I think COVID shone a light on they absolutely don't need us at all. You know, we should maybe be there to supplement, you know, whatever they are doing for themselves, but we shouldn't be there as a sort of replacement, creating dependency. So now it sort of might be unique to me because I live in an area sort of very rich in sort of community development, you know, and like a long history of it. So I think that sort of infrastructure was there, but it had been suppressed by, you know, the community almost being sort of invaded and colonized by organizations, but it was still there and you could see it rising up. So it'd be interesting to hear if anybody else noticed a similar thing happening, and do they think that's what would happen in a new system if we give the community space to breathe?
Yeah.
Would you do it?
Yeah, I mean,
I
I with my friends set up a mutual aid network for trans and non-binary people in South Wales. Just at the beginning of COVID, it wasn't necessarily because of COVID, but there was great need that we weren't seeing filled. And it honestly is incredible the support that had. Even though we didn't have any, professional accreditation or anything like that, it was just a group of trans people trying to get stuff for other trans people. People showed so much trust in us and so much willingness to help. It was absolutely incredible. We can put out in an evening. We have a trans person in, say, Splot, who doesn't have any food for the week. Is there anyone who can drop around some groceries? And we'll get 4 or 5 people in Splot, come in and say, yes, we'll help out. And I think that people do want to help other people, and I think it's this crisis, although it has been awful, has shown us that. And I think a lot of mutual aids have cropped up for that reason. And I'd like to see more support for organizations like ours. But at the moment, what seems to be happening is, we can't get funding unless we jump through XYZ hoop. You have to register as a charity. But then the problem is, then of course you can't be a political organization. And then how does that work if you're a mutual aid organization for trans people, especially in the current climate? So they would, I think I agree with you, Pete, there would definitely be stuff that sprung up, and I wonder what the others think. So what do you think, Sarah? Do you agree? Do you think that people do want to sort of do what they can to help others? Or
I just think the closer you get to the people that require whatever they need, the more likely you're going to get what they need.
Yeah,
it really is simple as that. People know what they need and they don't need, and if you go to the source of whatever's needed and ask people, they know.
100%.
And the trouble is, the decision is made such a long way away. And, I've talked about egos and I've talked about power, and it just gets so diluted and mismanaged that then those people don't get what they need.
Yeah, definitely. What do you think, Zoe Webb?
Yeah, I think that community is key, but I don't think you can give people community. I think they've got to find it. We can certainly be there to support them in that journey, but I think friendships, relationships are, and understanding what you're good at, what your purpose is, where your strengths are, is key to addressing anything in your life, and for me, for anyone, that's the same sort of premise. So perhaps that's where services could be measured, if in fact services still exist. The ideal would be that these services aren't here. That would be the ultimate aim, that we're not needed. But perhaps that's how we should be measured, on how much a person is actually achieving what they want to achieve for themselves.
Yeah.
Services.
Yeah. I think that has happened in certain places. For example, when I was a service user, I was paraded around as look at this great work we did with this person. They were homeless and now they're in uni again, and they have a very good, little ending that we can wrap up with a bow. And like I think you said earlier, Zoe, it feels very tokenistic. It is good to have success stories and to measure success through that, but it seems, for speaking as the service user who has been that person, it feels good, you know, but also eventually you do sort of question, I'm being used as a little doll here, you know, to parade around by this organization, and what am I actually gaining from it? Like, what, you know, I'm very grateful to that organization for helping me, but, you know, I'm being treated as a little figurine that's sort of shown around to everyone in the sector. And then people come up to you at the end and go, oh, you're so inspirational. And you're just like, thank you. But, you know, once you hear that about 10 times, it's a bit strange, especially when you've just been trying to survive, you know. But yeah, sorry, Zoe Thomas, we didn't get your response on that.
I think it just reflected on what you said, that it doesn't feel sincere, does it? I think that when charities and policies are written by people that, you know, sometimes don't have the lived experience, which I think it's really important we have people with lived experience at the top, working alongside people, that you do end up getting sort of paraded round and demonstrated as a good model, one outcome to maybe 5,000 more, that they haven't managed to achieve that with, and it can be really, really difficult and overwhelming. I wonder, with what you were saying, Pete, like why community has disappeared a bit. I know that for me, raising children now was very different to how I was raised when it comes to the word community, and why that has been suppressed, and how we can reignite that again, so people in communities can take hold and responsibility over the people living near them and in their lives. So yeah, I suppose I'm just curious to why that's happened, why that's disappeared, sadly.
I think it might be a bit controversial, but I think it's by design, honestly. We, like I say, I'm very close to the community, the trans community, and we are very close knit because of what we go through, and we've been signaled by certain institutions that we're a threat because of that. You know, the police especially, it's a threat to them. You know, it was quite eye-opening to find out that they had us pegged as a potential threat to them, even though all we were doing was mobilizing the trans community to help each other, and staged one little protest outside the Senate. And I think it's by design. That I think the things that people can do when they come together is so powerful and threatening that the state are scared of it. That's my personal feelings. I don't know how the rest of you feel. Shall I hear from, I'll pick Sarah. What do you think? Why is that community
yeah, because, you know, services and the power base, they want to help, but they don't want to actually give you power, because that's threatening.
Yeah.
And, you know, I loved your story about being wheeled out as a figurine, and I'm sorry you had to go through that. But, you know, the reason that had to happen is because there aren't that many people that services can do that with. Yeah. Because they're not that successful.
Yeah, 100%.
And the person that got you to university was you, not them.
Yeah.
And, you know, shame on them that, you know, they can't celebrate the successes of everybody.
Yeah, yeah. That was something that's kind of what made me feel thing, because I then met another trans person who had used the same organization and had a very different story to me. And I feel like maybe, like I said, it's good to have role models for the service users, and it's good to be able to share happy stories, because we hear a lot of awful things. But I think those happy stories need to be the standard, and not the, you know, it's not that this person is a special success case. It's that this is our typical person, and this is what we do typically on a day-to-day basis. You know what I mean? I think that's the difference. What do you think, Pete?
Sorry, I was just reading some comments. What was the question again?
What was the question?
I was reading some comments. Some people were making very interesting comments about power.
Yeah.
You know, and it was sort of leading to me think, well, to what extent? And people are quite right. There's definitely power imbalances, and especially when you go into a community and say like, may I help you? You know, and I think it was Lynn that sort of brought up, are we at risk of sort of doing things to communities and to people rather than them doing it for themselves or doing it with them? So I think we need to be sort of conscious of that the whole time. And while one of the girls was saying that we maybe can't give people community, we can certainly give them space to be a community, you know, because if you sort of think about it, a lot of the services that we provide have taken over the functions of communities and of families, you know. There would be typical community functions. And like the example I used earlier, when we move out of community space, communities flourish by themselves organically, you know, because people do want to help fellow citizens. But in terms of the power, I've been reading about 3 or 4 different comments on power, and it sort of got me thinking just before it gets any later in the day, we should maybe examine our own role in that, and where I think that sort of tends to happen is in the language we use. And I'm going to hark back to the time of sort of the golden age of community development, when we used to talk about citizens and families and residents and young people. And now we talk about clients and service users and a whole host of sterile, you know, names that may carry connotations of power with them. Because if you have a service provider and a service user, that's not a horizontal relationship, you know. So to what extent are we sort of perpetuating that, and where does that language come from? Does it come from the funder, from social policy? And how can we start to challenge power if we're aware that the power imbalance exists? Can we maybe start asking questions? Well, how do we challenge that?
That's a very good question.
You know,
who else will go answering it? Yeah, I definitely, with your point about the language is so important. It seems to me that it's become very corporate. You know, where it used to be, I feel like maybe I wasn't there, but maybe it used to be that charities and other charitable organizations the whole point was that they were embedded in the community, right? But now you have these huge charities, which are corporations, you know, they are in an ecosystem of corporations. And so the language they use is very corporate because they aren't embedded in that community anymore. They are corporations. So I don't know, well, maybe there's something to be said there about, you know, there's scholarship coming out all the time about what they call the charity industrial complex and how it's become this industry. You know, maybe that's where a lot of that language comes from. I don't know. Yeah.
I'm just seeing that there's a question here in the Q&A from Robert, who's asking how, and it's a very, very good question, how do we challenge authority when we're in the system? We've all got responsibilities, and walking away from a job isn't always an option. Can we raise up? And that's interesting on a whole lot of levels, because maybe we shouldn't be walking away from, maybe we should be staying behind to challenge from within. And I think, what did you call the guy? Ralph Miliband. He was the father of David and Ed Miliband. He's written extensively on that very topic. And if anybody has any sort of suggestions, you know, when as the community development worker in me is sort of automatically thinking collective action. Here we are all together. So let's decide, well, how do you challenge this from within, rather than all of us sort of saying, well, we've had enough, we're all walking away, you know. So how can we change things together, I suppose? Robert's asking, in a safe way, bearing in mind that people have mortgages and kids and need to keep their jobs.
Yeah. What do you think, Zoe Webb?
Well, I can only really talk about what I'm trying to do, I guess, which is just keep having the conversations and challenge in a very respectful way. I guess, because I think I said earlier on, this isn't personal against another professional, because I've not met anyone yet who isn't trying to make a difference, who isn't trying to do something good. They truly believe that's what they're trying to do. I just don't think they potentially realize that they are so institutionalized within the system, because we've been working in it for so long, and I include myself in that. So it is about sharing relevant. It can be quite subtle, as well as working towards a paradigm shift. At the moment, I'm making small changes, having conversations with lots of different people, sharing things like this movement, being active on social media, and connecting with people who I feel are my allies, make it more bearable, I guess.
Yeah, I mean, this is why the New System Alliance exists, I imagine, is so that people working in the system can not feel alone. Because I imagine I don't really work very closely with the system. I try and avoid it where possible. I can imagine it feels very lonely, and I think some of you did describe those feelings. And I think this is why I was so excited to get involved with this panel and this organisation, because I think it's so important that professionals come together and stand together and say, we're not okay with this anymore. I'll ask Zoe Thomas, so do you want to answer the question as well? How do we challenge authority when we're in the system? We've all got responsibilities. Walking away from a job isn't always an option. Can we rise up?
Yeah, so I can only speak from my experience. I think as when you're in such a big organisation and that people are so powerful within that organisation, it is really, really difficult. It becomes mentally overwhelming and it becomes draining. For me, I was going in every single day, sort of fired up and prepared to how I'm going to challenge what I believed was wrong within the system. And when you're repeatedly told to just play the game or just do your job and go home and not worry about any of that stuff, it was beyond your control. It becomes wearing and disheartening. And my fear was that I would then become part of the system that I was so detested so much, I suppose.
Yeah, I think a lot of us come to this sector wanting to make a difference because, for whatever reason, I don't think anyone comes to this sector saying they want to work in the system, with all the little protocols and stuff. They want to make a difference, and it's very tough to work in a place where you feel like the reasons why you came in are not, they're not the reason. You're not fulfilling those kind of goals, I guess. So what did you think, Sarah?
Just don't give up. Don't ever give up.
Yeah.
Just lean into feeling uncomfortable. Look after your mental health wherever you are. But, so if it gets too much, obviously, you need to look after yourself first. But don't give up. Find those people that you can have an alliance with and challenge those people that don't agree with you, but never give up. Even if you change jobs, just remember why you're doing what you're doing, which at the end of the day it's for me, it's like Zoe said at the beginning, it's about people's human rights to have a home. And however uncomfortable you feel, if you just keep going back to that is a massive motivator.
Yeah.
So just, lick your wounds, start another day.
Yeah.
I should take my own advice.
Yeah. Some people are sharing their reasons for coming into the job in the chat. So someone says, the reasons I came into this work 16 years ago aren't the same as now. I had to see what was wrong and unlearn what I thought was best practice in being a professional. Being human is so important in all that we do. Need to unprofessionalize. I think that's 100% true. It's tough because I'm at the moment sort of semi-professional because I'm doing what professionals do, but I'm not getting paid for it. and it's difficult for me to sort of navigate personally, because I know the people I'm helping, right? So I know them as friends and as community members, you know, we're all sort of thing. But because I am working at these issues for them, there is a power dynamic creeping in that I'm very aware of. And so for me, what I did, practically speaking, to sort of combat that is I was the one looking after all these people. And so when it came time to formalize, because we had to formalize in order to keep doing what we were doing, I said, okay, I'm not going to be in charge of the organization because I'm already in a position of power. And so I want to work to undermine the power I have. Do you know what I mean? Sort of share out that power a bit amongst the community. So that's kind of what I did, and I'm trying to do, because I still do have too much in my hand and I do want to share it out. And I don't, but the trouble is, of course, is that not everyone who has that power is that mindful of it. You know what I mean? There are some people who enjoy having all the power in these situations. And so the thing I'd say, if you do find yourself having too much power, is to sort of think to yourself actively, what can I do to sort of flatten this a bit? Because it's not acceptable for, you know, especially when someone is so vulnerable. We talk a lot about vulnerable adults, and there needs to be some kind of way to flatten these power dynamics. But I don't know where that is in the system, because there's so many reasons why you can't be person to person now, and a lot of them are safeguarded and whatnot. And obviously you're not allowed to, for example, you know, my support worker and I had a really good relationship, but she can't talk to me anymore because obviously she was my support worker. There's reasons for that, obviously, but it's stilted. You know, the relationships we build with service users are very stilted, and I wonder what we can do to sort of fix that, you know. So I don't know what you think. Who shall I pick? I'll pick Sarah, since you're already unmuted. Oh, you just muted yourself. Oh, stuck on mute. Oh, there we go.
Sorry, it messed up a bit then. Can you see me? Because I can't see you.
Yeah, we can see you, yeah.
Okay. I think everybody has a choice with every single human interaction that they have about whether they use their power or not, and whether it's needed. So, you know, it's about acknowledging that if you're a worker, then you have got power. And, you know, in order to make that human interaction normal and successful and person-led for the other person, you need to give up that power. And again, you know, sometimes that can feel uncomfortable, because often workers prefer to be in control.
Yeah.
Because people like to be in control. And, you know, if somebody is telling them something contrary to the rules or contrary to how they think things should be done, then people tend to up their game and use their power. But, you know, I go back to this about feeling uncomfortable. It's so important to feel uncomfortable, because it's an indication that something's not right. So in an interaction with a person you're working with, you know, if you're feeling a little bit smug, a little bit in control or out of control, and then you use your power, you know that power dynamics has gone wrong. And it's the same when you feel uncomfortable in an organization. You know, listen to yourself, listen to your intuition, because it's telling you that something's wrong. So feeling uncomfortable is really important.
Yeah.
It's what you do next, I suppose, is really important.
Yeah, definitely. What do you think, Zoe, about this thing of power imbalance between you know, professional and the person we're trying to support.
Which one of us are you talking to, Rudy?
Zoe Thomas, sorry. Keep forgetting.
I know, that's difficult. It's interesting. I suppose I was just looking at the comments, and it says on there like things that really anger and aggravate. And I was sort of thinking, gosh, how long have they got? I've got a whole list to respond to that. I think there's a massive power balance, and I think that one of the things that anger, so they go together, is lack of accountability for things and lack of ownership.
Yeah.
So I think one of the things that I used to try and educate new staff on is it's okay to say we messed up. It's okay to say we're sorry. It's okay to say that we're going to learn from this, and the same mistakes won't happen again.
Yeah.
We're human. There's always this them and us sort of click, which is really difficult. And in any situation, especially for me, when I was locking women behind a steel door at night, there's a massive power balance. But it's about being human and being kind and trying to move on. Just say, I'm sorry, I messed up. Like, I'm going to try my hardest. It's okay to mess up. Like, it's okay to be forgiven, and it's okay to move forward, and you can move forward. Because then that's showing that people that are also in that situation, that they can be forgiven. They can rectify mistakes that they think they've made and move forward and lead a positive life in the community and give back. But that doesn't happen from the top. I don't often hear, you know, politicians and that saying, I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, you don't.
You know, so maybe, so I think for me, that's what the power difference is. Accountability and ownership needs to start happening across the board.
Yeah, definitely. How about other Zoe Webb?
Yeah, probably going back to what I was talking about earlier around, it's also one of the things that makes me really angry, to answer Lynn's question in the comments, making people jump through lots and lots of hoops to obtain housing. You know, pointless, unrealistic things that we don't measure ourselves on.
Yeah.
You know, when we apply or get our own housing, we're making people that go into services do all these things and become these different people that are measured at every single angle.
Definitely. And Pete?
In relation to power, I've posted a wee link, or not a link, sorry, just a suggestion on the Nurture Development website. I think Lynn had alluded to this earlier. If we start to examine power in our relationships with people, there's a cracking article on the Nurture Development website called From Expert to Alongsider. So moving away from that sort of professional.
Okay, that's interesting.
And it sort of describes sort of four states of being when you do to people, for people, with people, or by people, you know. And that's a really good place to start. And all your examination of power relationships can sort of move on from there. And I don't know if I should answer Lynn's question about what makes me angry, because anyone who follows me on Twitter will just he's gonna rant again. There was one last week I did share on Twitter, and there was a local organisation to me, and that advertised for support workers, full-time job, and the salary was £16,000 a year.
Wow.
And no word of a lie. And as part of that job, you had to do all this needs analysis and you know, all the rest of it, and making people jump through hoops, you know. And a big part of the job was around sort of helping people with their budgeting skills, you know, and financial management and whatever. And said, well, how can you reasonably help somebody with their financial management and their budgeting skills and all when you're going to be living in poverty yourself?
Yeah, literally.
You know, and that really makes me angry. That there's organisations out there masquerading as charities, and all they're doing is harvesting grants, really. And then they're sort of creaming off their admin fees, and they're not passing the salary on to the frontline worker, and thus, you know, the citizens that they're working alongside them. So I think that's a big thing that people need called out on, you know. And then on the flip side of that, there's very good organisations, and they'll, you know, they will pay good wages and they'll really think about what they're doing. But there's that sort of disparity there again. You know, it's not the same across the board. So that tends to annoy me.
Yeah. What about you, Sarah? What angers you in this sector?
How long have you got? I think one of the things that angers me most is how people get blamed for everything. Yeah. And all of it is systemic. And, you know, even public opinion, you know, there's, it's like, oh, people are choosing to be homeless, or like you said at the beginning, or, you know, well, it's a little bit their fault, you know, not that it's to do with poverty, childhood poverty, the fact there aren't enough houses, the fact the private rented sector's a nightmare. And then, you know, individual policies of organisations. And then again, it's the front line that has to mop it up when, you know, this person is kicking off in a hostel. And, you know, you absolutely, if you go back through that person's life, everything is about the system that got them to that point where they're kicking off in that hostel. And then they're evicted, and then they have to start all over again, and then they've got all this baggage about how wrong they are and a whole list of problems in their suitcase to carry to the next dysfunctional service. Yeah, that makes me fucking furious. Use my language.
Oh god. I just, something just occurred to me then. Oh, I was going to pick up on Pete's point about pay, because that's one thing that really got me. Like I said earlier, I was paraded around quite a bit. And you know, at the time, it's true, it gave me experience of public speaking, and it raised my profile as an activist, and it did allow me to set up the mutual aid. So in some ways, yes, I did profit from that work. However, for me, you know, I was homeless and I didn't have benefit. I think I had some benefits, but not really enough. And I was doing a lot of work and not getting paid for any of it. And that happens a lot across the charity sector, especially people with lived experience. They're doing a lot of work, a lot of consulting, a lot of helping shape policy, but they're not getting paid for any of it. And yes, okay, charities aren't, you know, they don't have, you know, millions and, well, often they don't have millions and millions and millions to pay people, but I think there's something to be said there about how we need to recognize as, you know, as the sector, that people should be paid for their time and paid well, because let's be honest, the work that we do is traumatic. It is traumatic, and the pay is not as good as it should be. So I think we should maybe talk a bit about that, you know, as well. So I'll come to Zoe Webb first. What do you think?
Sorry, I was just reading the comments.
Yes.
I think exactly about the pay or the funding. Can you just say that bit again? Sorry.
Yeah. So basically, you know, I think there's a sort of trend in this sector where people will come in with lived experience to consult or to talk or whatever it is, and they're not getting paid for it, you know, and also the people who work for charities, often who are on the front lines, are not getting paid very well, as Pete said. And at the end of the day, the work they do is traumatic and difficult and highly skilled. So what are your kind of feelings on that? You know, it's difficult, isn't it? Because you don't want to, as a charity, you don't want to have your biggest bill be staff, because you want to put that money into helping people. But, you know, at the same time, people do need to pay the bills, and they deserve a good quality of life considering the work they do. So I don't know, what do you think of that sort of balance?
Yeah, it is difficult, and I think maybe that comes down to the funding as well. I know Pete talked about harvesting funding, But sometimes there are limits to how you can operate, and that will have a direct impact on how much you can, you can pay out. In an ideal world, then of course people should be paid what their worth is. And I keep going back to COVID again. My son's a barber. My other son was on placement. So when we first went into lockdown, one was put on unpaid leave because it was before furlough. One was laid off, straight away. And then he went back to work, and all the other sort of frontline workers, for want of a better word, basically all the low paid workers, are the ones that were going out and continuing to work in the communities, putting themselves at risk. And to me, that spoke volumes as well. How much do we value these roles in society? So, yeah, I mean, it's really tricky because you've only got so much to work with within the business that you're operating.
Yeah.
But most people should be paid what they're worth, and everyone's time is worth something. And involving people with lived experience to, whatever it is that you want to refer to it as, who's benefiting from that as well? Is the person that you're asking to be involved in that actually benefiting? I've been doing a lot of thinking around that at the moment as well. So yes, of course, their time is as valuable as your time, but it goes back more than that for me. It goes back, why am I asking them to be involved? What is my motive? What are they gaining? Oh, sorry, gone a bit around the houses there. But I think it's a difficult one to answer.
Yeah, it is really difficult. Zoe Thomas, what do you think on paying people and not paying people and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I was just noticing one of the comments in there saying about I think it was Stephen saying it's not an imbalance if you ask people to talk and give their experience. Yeah, I don't agree with it so much, because I think that actually people that have got lived experience are always on a back foot when it comes to going for jobs and going for roles where they may have achieved the same qualifications as such, but they've got a stigma or a label attached to them that's either that's normally actually been attached by a system, not by themselves, and it's been on there for many, many years. And so I think they're already on a back foot. So I think they do deserve pay for their time. They do deserve being paid to talk about their trauma. There's a huge diverse range of people at the moment talking about what they've been through and the trauma of other people. And it's not our place to do that. People are happily wanting to talk about their experiences and their personal trauma. Then it's important that we show appreciation. And actually, if those people are in difficult, challenging times, sometimes that appreciation can be best given through finances somehow. Yeah,
I agree. I mean, for me, when I think, I don't know if Stephen has misunderstood, but when I'm talking about this, what I'm talking about is going to conferences of about 200 people and talking about the most traumatic moments of your life to 200 people, and then going home and having to sit with it. It's difficult. It is difficult. And in an ideal world, yes, we would be paid for that. Not necessarily these kinds of conversations, because we're talking generally, but if someone is standing there on a little pedestal and talking about the most traumatic and darkest moments of their life, I don't know how you can really say that they shouldn't be paid. But anyway, what do you think, Sarah? Sorry, we haven't heard from you in a bit.
Yeah, okay, so the thing is that most people don't do things for money. They, if they feel passionate about sharing their story, then there's something really valuable in it not being because of the money. However, we live in a capitalist society and our worth is totally valued by monetary means. So, if you have some executive, you know, or a commissioner talking at a conference, you're most likely they'll get paid, or you know, a life coach speaker, an inspirational speaker, you know, they can charge £2,000 a day, but you know, you can't beat somebody's story, because that's why people go to conferences, to hear about how things are actually panning out for the people that we're there for. So as much as I'd like to say, well, it's much more valuable, it's a valuable experience, it is a valuable experience. And I bet, Rudy, if you spoke at a conference, you wouldn't do it for the money, you do it to inspire people. But yeah, of course they should bloody get paid like everybody else. They should get paid more. They should be on £2,000, and everybody else should do it for free, because they're getting paid anyway in their job.
Yeah, I think that was a key point, isn't it? Is that I was homeless with very little income, speaking at this very professional environment about, you know, the worst things that I'd ever gone through, and I wasn't getting paid. So it was.
Well, I guess, sorry to interrupt, but I guess that was your choice.
Yeah.
And that is, you know, arguably that's amazing experience for you to do that. You know, that's kind of part of your personal development and your choice. But if other speakers are getting paid, then yes, you should. Definitely. If other people aren't getting paid, then I think that's different.
Yeah, definitely. It depends on circumstances, obviously. And I think Ben Curran raised a good point. It's quite common for BAME diversity consultants to be asked to share their lived experience and expertise pro bono, as if it isn't worthy of remuneration. It perpetuates the problem. People should be paid. And it's similar for the trans community. I've been asked to do consulting and stuff for free, and the reality is, you know, I work 20 hours a week for free, and I can't work anymore for free. Do you know what I mean? I can't do it. Someone actually asked, we'll wrap up now because we're getting to the end, but someone asked a question, an anonymous person asked the question, Sarah's already answered it, but do any of you do any political lobbying in order to try and make real change in terms of funding statutory services such as social care? Surely change can only really happen when the Tories are out of power. To answer this myself, yes, a lot. Like I said, I set up a mutual aid group, so yes, and I've done protests and all that fun stuff as well. But I'll just quickly ask the others. I know Sarah's answered it with yes and yes. Lobbied for sanctions to stop. Yes, agreed. Tories, but system won't change with Labour. But I'll just quickly ask Pete to come in. What do you do any sort of political work?
I try to. It's funny enough, I was speaking to a colleague in another organisation yesterday, and we had noticed, something that we thought needed changed, and we were saying, right, well, we'll put our heads together and we'll put together an information pack, and we'll sort of lobby the local sort of institutions that you need to, if you're making that decision, you maybe need to be considerate of this. So we would sort of do a lot of that. I've had, I've tried sort of lobbying for big things, or you're adding your voice to it or adding your effort to it, but you can't really see, well, you know, if it makes a difference or not. And where I had more luck was with local council level. You know, if you sort of built relationships with your local city councillors, and they tended to be sort of from bigger parties. I'm sure you're all familiar with Belfast and their political parties. They tend to be from sort of very, very sort of big parties. There's two big parties. So if you can sort of build those relationships at a local level and sort of challenge things at local council level, that's very real for the communities, the people we're working alongside. Very often you can sort of get the things to ripple up the way as well, you know. So it's sort of like a bottom-up approach rather than trying to go sort of straight to the top, you know.
Yeah, I hear you. What about you, Zoe Thomas?
Yeah, I think now I've left service, I've got a bit more scope to be able to do that, because you're quite restricted when you're wearing a uniform. You can't really put your names to anything. A bit like Pete, I am active on things at a community level, and then again on platforms such as Twitter. It's the only platform I do use, but I think that actually you can build alliances on there, and you know, sometimes a collective could be a force to be reckoned with to a degree. So yeah, trying to outwardly put views across and opinions and different points of views and ways of challenging things is something I try and actively do, but it is really difficult.
And Zoe Webb?
In answer to the question directly with political parties, no, I haven't done any lobbying, but it has been at a community level. You know, within services, presenting to safeguarding boards, things like that. And like Zoe said, on social media.
Yeah, it's tough though, isn't it? Because obviously legally, as a charity or charitable organization, you can't do it. It's really difficult. So you have to do it as an individual, and then obviously loses its impact. Like I know, for example, a homelessness charity, everyone in that charity knows that universal credit irreparably damaged and massively piled on their workload, but they can't say it as a charity. You know, I think I understand why the law exists, but it's very, very frustrating. So I wonder if we've only got a few more minutes, but we'll just finish it off thinking, you know, is it right that charities are apolitical, or do you think that in times like these they kind of need to be able to speak truth to power, as the saying goes? What do you think? I'll come to Pete first.
I don't think anybody is ever neutral, you know.
Yeah.
I think by our actions and our attitudes, we either maintain the status quo or we challenge the status quo. You know, I don't think it's possible to be neutral. I don't think that exists. So I think then we'll have a choice. Do we want to change things, or do we? And I sort of heard a phrase somebody using one day, and they were saying we should be fighting poverty rather than looking for our role in serving poverty, you know.
Yeah.
And to me, there's the two sides of that.
Yeah, nice. Zoe Webb?
Yeah, I think just basically what Pete said. I think that is about fighting poverty. I don't think you can be impartial, and it's about being human, you know, and treating people as people.
Okay, cool. What about Sarah?
Well, I think actually charities have a duty to call out what's happening. I guess they can do that in a way that's not party political, but it is political.
Yeah.
And I think lots of charities do that. And you know, actually, it's much more effective if it's based on evidence as well.
Yeah.
So if a charity is collecting good data is really important to influence politics.
Yeah. And lastly, Zoe Thomas.
I think that charities predominantly are meant to help be the voice of people that are not heard. So they're meant to be able to speak up when people don't feel able to or strong enough at that point. And I think that's why it's really important that charities do take a stand and their views are given over in an honest and direct way. But the people within that charity, first of all, need to feel empowered to be able to do that. They need to feel that they're going to do that without being managed out of their work, that they're not going to be isolated and cut off or silenced. Because how can you be a voice for others if you feel that you're going to be silenced for speaking that? So massively political, but I think it's to move forward, charities really need to assert themselves and realise how much of an impact they do have in policies.
Definitely. I think that's a good note to end. And maybe finally, I can't think. What's a good question to end on? Do you think? A quick one.
Something to do with hope for the future.
Yeah, something like that. Go on then, Sarah. What do you think?
Well, I go back to what I said previously. Don't give up. Don't give up.
Yeah. Zoe Webb.
Yeah, same. Keep chipping away. Stay true to yourself and your own values and beliefs.
Zoe Thomas.
I think I'll take a bit of advice that one of the ladies in my care gave me, is if you don't challenge it, you can't change it. So ultimately, that's what I try to hold on to.
Brilliant. And Pete.
Am I on mute? No.
No,
I
you're
think
good.
the very fact that that we have all found each other and you know, sort of like-minded people. You're kind of on the same path or want to see the same things, and I think the fact that we have actually found each other and we're here today having this conversation is the definition of hope. You know, it's almost sort of miraculous thanks to technology, and that is our hope. So if you can stick together, things definitely happen when you have numbers and you can amplify each other's message.
Yeah, and I'll echo what some people say in the chat. You know, we need to stick together, keep in touch. Now we have this platform and this alliance to work with, and I'm looking forward to seeing how it develops from here on out. So thank you everyone for coming. I'm not sure if we're all going to go or if Lynn is going to step in.
Thanks, Rudy.
Thanks,
Thank
Rudy.
you, Rudy.
Yeah, it's been great.
Yeah.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye.